I've been studying how leaders work through competing demands and tensions for about 25 years. And I started by really looking at the strategy level. How do you manage the short term and the long term, your social responsibilities, your financial responsibilities, a host of places like this. But over time, what I found is that these tensions that I think of as really strategic, we live them every day, right? You live them in gaming, you live them in your work life, because it can be also things like, how do I perform and hit my daily targets and continue to learn and think for the future? How do I care for myself and care for others, which is also kind of how do I foster individuality and my team? So there are lots of these different tensions, and what I've studied over the years and learned is our default, which is really either or thinking, is about kind of, weigh the pros and cons, make a choice, move on. But it's a trade-off, it's limiting, it can even spur vicious cycles, and there's a better alternative. And so we've seen great leaders personally, professionally, strategically, use both and thinking to navigate tensions on an ongoing basis and kind of come to grips with, this is life. Life is about tensions. It's why we use yin yang and Taoist theory as well as ancient Greek. It's just the way it is. And we'll all be better off if we accept that this is part of life and learn how to navigate. This performing learning tension I am hearing about so much lately. I had an exec say it the other day, and I started wondering about you with gaming. She called it kind of the head up, head down tension. So that when it's about just, you got to hit your targets, you got to survive and thrive and excel today, you put your head down, right? You just get it done. And at the same time, you got to pull it up every once in a while and reflect on what's working, what's not working. That's the learning side. And you can't do them simultaneously, right? You got to iterate.
I always found that a lot of people, like when I play like another video game that isn't Smash Brothers, I have a tendency to pick it up very quickly, much faster than a lot of the other people that aren't similarly as good as the game that I play as. And a lot of people are like, have this idea like talent or natural talents or something like that. And I don't actually, I think it's like true to a certain extent. I think there's some degree of like talent that exists in the world, but I think my real skill that I have is learning. I learned how to learn by learning how to play this game. And I think learning how to learn is like the most important part of being able to get across anything, right? You need to be very willing to look at what you're doing and being able to like self-analyze. What am I doing? What is wrong with what I'm doing? What is working? And try to figure out the whys. It's like, this is working because of X, Y, Z. This always works in this specific position or something like that. And I am just able to do that very subconsciously at this point, but it was never a natural thing for me. I had to teach myself how to do that, because in whatever game I've been playing, because I competed in something almost all my entire life. It was like chess when I was really young. It was a different game when I was a little older, and it was Smash as of right now. And learning how to play those games is about going in, hey, having fun, you're enjoying yourself, but also like, okay, I'm losing. Why am I losing? And then not getting like mad or frustrated at it, not trying to do the same thing I'm doing, but harder or something like that. It's more about, okay, this is working, this isn't. Break it down to the specific interactions that are happening, that are going the other direction, and then being able to go back. So much of playing any game, I think, not even just like esports, but sports in general, I think a lot of people can see the quarterbacks throw the football or something like that, and it's like, well, the times they miss the pass or something like that doesn't mean they need to go to the training field and throw harder. It means they need to go back to the footage and look at the position and look at all of the, okay, so these players are moving this way, this player is moving this way. I threw to this guy, but it was wrong. I shouldn't have thrown to this guy. I should have thrown to this guy because this person was actually like a few meters out of position and this receiver was wide open, even if it didn't look like it from my perspective. And I need to recognize the patterns of realizing who was open and who wasn't or something like that much better. It's so much more about that, going back and looking at the tapes and figuring out what was wrong. So whenever I'm talking about like the learning tensions, it is so much more about, I think so many people are like, oh, you just need to go back and press the buttons better or something like that. And it's like, really, it's not. No. The only difference between someone who plays Smash Bros and someone who doesn't play Smash Bros is the pressing the buttons. But the difference between me and the people who play Smash Bros is what I am thinking about and what I am looking at when I am playing it.
Okay, so let me test something on you, because I love the way you think about this, and I do think it goes to this performing learning. While you're actually in competition, this is part of kind of learning theory. You're not learning per se, you're doing. right? You're trying out what you've done. But the learning cycle, right, there's that performing and there's the competing. Then you move into that reflection period. What are the patterns? What am I seeing? Then you can practice, right? So you try it out. But it's this loop. You've gotten so good at that looping, right, that you know how it works, and there's a lot of muscle memory and other things happening. But I think people, you're right, people think this is natural because they're watching it happening so fast. But your purpose, you're intentional about the way you're doing it.
It's even cooler because a lot of what am I learning, in fact, actually at like the toppest of levels, the learning is happening while you're playing. Yes, so like at the same time, like if you really think about it, my process of like, okay, so I think like what I recommend to new people getting into the game or something like that, once you've learned how to, like press the buttons correctly and now your next test is learning how to think while playing the game, I tell people go in, play, do something that records it, lose ideally or win ideally, I don't know, whichever one, and then go back, watch it, and figure out, okay, where were you losing, where were you winning, and write down why, and try to figure out all the reasons, and then maybe watch like someone who's playing your character or something like that, and then who's a lot better than you, and figure out what they were doing in those same situations, and try to figure out why they were doing what you weren't doing, and why their thing is better.
Okay, so let me ask you a different one, because I love that, and I can almost watch your brain work as you talk about it, and then you play a different game. You said on the one side, you can then learn that new game faster, but I'm wondering what that game does to your primary game.
Oh, yeah, so
Right?
I think it depends a certain extent to how similar the game is, because there's like very similar games to Smash Brothers that I could play. There's other Smash Brothers titles, for example. There's like it's a series. And I could play some of the older ones or something like that. And a lot of the things carry over. A lot of things are completely different. I am not a pro at any of the older games, even close to.
But do you learn new things from those older games?
Yes.
That's what I like.
Because especially from like some of the older titles, even though I don't like play them to a professional level, I watch them at a professional level. I enjoy watching them. And I see some of the things that like are prioritized in the thinking of playing those games that are not prioritized in the thinking of playing our game, but are still very applicable. I think one of my favorite things that I've realized when I watch any competitive game, the first thing I look at now, it's like almost, I kind of like describe it as like, it's almost like ruined for me watching anything competitively to an extent, because what I'm looking at is almost never what's happening. I'm looking at the positioning. Everything I found, in like to an extent of like life. Life is all about positioning.
Oh, but Stephen, I do that when I'm watching like somebody teach.
Exactly.
Right? I'm listening to their content, but I'm actually watching the approach. How are they doing it? Why are they doing that
Where are
that
they
way?
setting themselves up?
Yeah.
And
I think that's a different level.
And wherever I watch like a soccer game or anything like that, I'm not watching the ball or who's kicking it. I am watching where the players are going in perspective to the ball. Like, where is the ball moving? Why is this guy running in the complete opposite direction? There's a reason for it. And I'm trying to figure that stuff out. So it's like, it's entertaining for me, but on for completely different reasons than it used to be in the past or something like that. And
But I think that goes back to learning, right? It has changed over time,
yes.
right? You're watching, then your playing has changed over time because you've gotten really good at this.
And I think it makes the sports easier for me to learn, and I think it would be making it easier to learn for anyone else who's also used to it. I think I could probably learn soccer, like obviously I have no chance of being professional. I'm way too late in that. But I could probably learn soccer to a competent level if I really applied myself to it, because I could understand the positioning to that easier. I don't think that's beyond anyone else's capabilities. I don't think it's like me being special in a unique way, but I think it's because that I learned how to learn this stuff quickly that I can recognize what it means. Like why this person's running this direction. This is like kind of a higher level thought or something like that. But it's I understand that is just part of the process to learning anything competitively, and I think people who learn how to learn could also do that. I think it is by far the most skill if you're trying to just learn how
But
to.
I think learning how to learn is the ultimate skill, period.
Yes.
Right? Which is how you learn how to get better at any tension you're navigating.
And the first place to look is always positioning, in my opinion. Like we always look at wherever you look at someone who's successful in anything, like look how they got there. Like where did they put themselves? They had to be in a position to succeed if they were going to succeed, and that applies to. Like someone playing like a sniper character in a video game or something like that. They put themselves in the right building, watching the right hallways for a reason or something.
Yeah, I think it applies to strategy and finance and other things too.
Absolutely
Actually, when
applies
you're saying
to who got a job or something
Yeah,
like that,
I
right?
agree.
And so I was like, I don't know. Whenever I
No, I like that approach. Okay, so let me test something with you. So one of the concepts that we found very paradoxical, and I'm wondering how it plays out in gaming and particularly in the learning of gaming, is improvisation, right? So we'll work with like a Second City, right? That's the makers of Saturday Night Live, and you know, there's improv in comedy, there's improv in jazz. Here's why we think it's an important framing around tensions, is that it's basically how do you build a framework with simple rules that make you better in terms of creativity, in terms of productivity, in terms of learning. So, I mean, I could give you various examples, but you know, even if it's with jazz or comedy, are there a few things you're always looking for that then it's not, some think, well, rules sound constraining. Like if you say, the first thing I'm really looking for is positioning. Some people could think that's constraining, but you've realized that that is a shortcut to get to the next step. And so these rules end up kind of fueling and accelerating what's going on.
Yes. So I thought I was when I was reading the book, I was like looking at it, and a lot of the solutions in the thought process, for one, are like very like collaborative. It seems like it's like a lot of like trying to make people work together better. Which to me, I play a game that is single player or something like that, right? It is all about me. I am a very much so the solo thought and focus on what happens to my success in the game or something like that. And when I was looking at, I was like thinking about this idea of like, okay, like improvisation. And a lot of the thoughts seem to be, okay, so how do we come up with like a better solution that's like more like good for everyone involved? Whereas I was kind of thinking about it and I was like, I think this is a very interesting thought process for like the outside the game thinking when I'm like looking at the footage and trying to figure out how to get better. But for the inside the game thinking, a lot of what I do is actually I'm trying to make decisions as simple as possible and easy to like. I am trying to limit my opponent's options as much as possible so that I have the least amount of things to think about. The best positions for me are the ones where my opponent has the least different possibilities in what they can do. If I know that I can beat my opponent's, like 90% of my opponent's options with one particular option of my own, I'm trying to force those situations to happen very often because statistically it is very much so in my favor or something like that.
And I think you and I are thinking about this the same way, because I think complexity and simplicity are actually paradoxical. They work hand in hand. You're a really complicated thinker. I mean, I can hear all the other pieces, but you can only build effective rules with that complicated understanding. Is that fair?
Yes. So a lot of what I'm attempting, so I always think a lot of people, I don't know if this is, I was actually very curious if this ever get explored in the book in any extent, but there's like, you can divide the player base of like Smash or any game really into like 3 levels, where there's like the low-level players, the introductory, like people who don't have a particularly great understanding, but they enjoy it to like a casual competitive extent. Then there's like the mid-level, like people who are trying to make their way to the top, but haven't quite got there yet. And then there is the top level. And there's a very common trend among explanations in these games where the newer players will say, just do this. And the mid-level players will write you an entire essay on what you should do in the situation. And then the top-level players will say, just do this.
Oh man, Stephen, I love that.
And
yes, we don't write about that, but I do think that's a classic. Here's what let's try this. I think that first level tends to be more either or thinking.
Yes.
Right? Like, we're just going to make this black and white. Then you've got that middle, because they're still processing, right? So in some ways, that long explanation is, I don't understand it well enough to be succinct.
Yes.
Right? And then that upper level is both and. I mean, because you've actually processed through all the complexity, and now you're cutting to the chase, but those rules aren't either or. They're more powerfully, how do we do both?
Yes, and I realized
like
this, when I got there, it was actually kind of like the eureka moment, like, oh wow, I'm a top level player, this is cool. Yeah. When I realized that I wasn't writing the essays anymore, I was saying, oh yeah, you do just, like when a top player said just do this, it made sense to me why they said that, because you just assume that you know all these other things, these other rules, like, yeah, this
You just jumped over that middle
this
chunk.
can't apply here, we just expect you to know that. This can't apply here, just expect you to know that. So obviously it has to be this thing, because it couldn't have been all these other things that we know about. Whereas the low-level players say, like, just do this, and they're not aware of all the exceptions of when not to do that or anything like that. The mid-level players are aware of it or gaining awareness of it, but they have to write it all out just to understand
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of process it in as it happens.
Exactly, yeah. And I was like, oh, that makes complete sense because top players in these situations do just do that immediately. They're the difference between like a top player in the situation and a mid-level player in the situation is the mid-level player would have had to think about it. The top-level player just knew. He's like, yeah, because I know in this situation all these things didn't apply, therefore it had to be this thing. Immediately, boom, snap. I made that decision way faster than the mid-level player did.
So Wendy Smith, my co-author, and I talk about this all the time, and it's not in the book, but we talk about, when we go into a situation, we have to think, is this paradox 1.0 or 2.0 or, right? Because it completely changes the way you talk to people and the kind of conversations you can have. But, we've studied remarkable leaders, and by the way, I think it's both end thinking is an individual sport to be a team sport. Like, you can't have these remarkable leaders building both end organizations unless they think this way themselves.
Yes.
Right? Like about my own career, my own learning. I mean, the way you're doing, I think that has to be there first, which is why, although we started at the organizational level, we came down to the human because we realized the only way that this works is if in the mind of the individual, they're doing what you're doing.
And you're looking at the like the everyday life examples, like you with your kid, or like the 1-year-old trying to look at like the oven on the stove and trying to figure out what's going on. It's like there's the individual.
But those were my eureka moments. I love your point, right? That was my, oh, wait a minute. I'm thinking this is rocket science, and it is in some level, but then you realize, actually, it can be really simple.
It's so cool. The human brain's like kind of
I love
simple,
it.
but also extremely
complicated.
Where it's like.
But I like the way you just did this because I want to think further on how to write that up because I don't think it's the same at both ends. Yeah. I think your thinking has changed so much from the either or to both end 2.0, paradox 2.0. And they're very different.
I would love to read anything on this phenomenon because I know it is applicable in so many other sports or even just other things where people who are very introductory say just do this, and the people who are top level also say just do this. Sometimes it's the same answer, but they don't mean the same things. And I'd
love to talk about it with more, I mean, we've talked about it at UC Athletics in some ways, right? With the coaching staff it's gaming at all levels, but I mean, I don't know, maybe life is a game, right? And there's more to be talking about, period.
That's the more I've realized, the more that I've realized how competing is such a universal concept. It's the more I abstract what I do in less of competing in Smash Bros and more just competing, the more I realized,
this is the mastery curve of competing.
Yeah.
Right? And we could put all sorts of competitions on here.
I was like, I would love to see everything that fits on there and see if there's anything that doesn't. Because everything I think about, I always think about the things that oh yeah, that probably does fit on there from my understanding of baseball. They just tell you to do this thing.
But you love patterns, so do I.
Yeah.
Right? I'm always looking for, wait a minute, does this translate? Does this generalize?
And patterns make everything so much easier.
Yes, they're the ultimate shortcuts.
And if you always the real thing that makes top level players or top is that they are able to create patterns in their head to make it easy to recognize what to do in every situation. It's everything I do is about, when I go back to my footage, it's okay, this guy beat me because he was beating me in the same situation over again. He understood something that I didn't, and I need to find a way to make sure that I can remember the situation instantly, that I don't have to think about it, and I'll just know what to do. I needed to have this down something so easily that my hands can do it for me.
This is moving so fast.
Exactly, yeah. I play a game that's measured in frames. Frames are 1/60th of a second.
Okay.
And so.
Oh, that's remarkable.
And so human reaction time is somewhere around 15 frames, roughly a fourth of a second. Right. And I need to find a way. The difference between the top players and everybody else is that when I see an animation, so the opponent presses their button, let's say we can simplify it down to they jumped, they dashed, they attacked, or they blocked, or something like that. Right. And their animation comes out on the first frame. Roughly about a fourth of a second later, I see that animation and I know what to do, and I respond. And the difference between, a lot of people talk about some video games are a game of human reaction time or something like that. If you just, the skill here is reaction time, in the same way that football skill is strength or something like that. I disagree because while reaction time can make a difference, I don't know the exact science behind it, but I know while most humans are around a fourth of a second, some could be a few frames faster, some could be a few frames slower. I don't think if you're a few frames slower, you're doomed, because I think what makes top level players is the big assumption that happens in that reaction time. That reaction time is under the assumption that humans know what's coming. If the humans are expecting what is about to happen, the reaction time is about 1/4 of a second. If they're not expecting it, it is a lot longer. Shock has like a huge impact on reaction time. And so if I was not expecting what they did, then I'm going to be a lot slower. Yeah, I'll just like register what it is. And even better than that, if I didn't know how to respond, then I have to go through the thinking process of how to respond to it, which adds on like seconds on what to do about it. And by that point, you're already way too late. The difference between the best to the best is being able to pattern recognize something immediately on the first frame, be able to respond with it in about 1/4 of a second later, and just do that every single time. Whereas everyone else sees that, they are shocked by the option, they don't know how to respond to it. They're shocked by it, so they weren't expecting it, and they also don't know how to do it, how to deal with it. And then they end up being seconds slower than we are, which is everything. Seconds are huge. And I think pattern recognition, finding ways to make those patterns as simple as possible so my brain doesn't get shocked and just is able to, they did this, I do this. They did this, I do this. They did this, I
That's
do
the ultimate agility, I think, though, being able to, you've actually built shock into the patterns,
Yes.
right?
I even like, if kind of like the weird way I think about it is, I don't even necessarily have to have been expecting a specific option. Let's say I was like focusing on jump or something like that. I was expecting them to jump, but I also have made the reaction like binary or something like that, where if they jump, I do this. If they do anything else, I do something else. And I have a way to make, so as opposed to trying to cover all 4 options with 4 different things, I have made it binary.
But I can see how you're moving faster then in your brain by
Exactly.
setting that up. Do you ever think about actually intentionally delaying time? Here's what I mean by this. Adam Grant wrote something recently that I thought was interesting about the value of procrastination. Now, he's talking about longer procrastination than a second. But his point is, if you use systems theory and see, right, all of these moves are they're connected, right? So your opponent is watching you as well. And depending on how much your opponent has expected your patterns, I think what Adam Grant is saying is sometimes another second pause, or whatever the frame number is, lets you watch their next move, or they've already almost started. It's like, I mean, soccer players do the same thing. If you're watching like penalty kicks, there are reasons why they delay is they're going in for the kick, because the goalie has already started to move. It's just a different way of, there's one thing to think, okay, well, how do I do this to be as fast as possible? And then there's the other piece that might add to it, which is, and where do I purposely set a delay? Because that might be the biggest shock of all.
Yeah.
Because they know how fast you are.
Yeah, so we would call this a timing mix-up, which is absolutely hugely relevant to like top-level play. In fact, it's probably one of the things that separates like the mid-level from the top level. Is a lot of the times there's a whole layer of mix-ups that happen, not just on what option.
So mix-ups sound like mistake, but you don't mean them as mistake.
No,
you
yeah,
mean
a mix-up is like an intentional thing to throw off your opponent. It is that's what, whenever you hear the term like mix or like mix-up in the context of fighting games at the very least, which is the subgenre that I play, it's always in the terms of trying to like throw off your opponent to some extent. And the best way to throw off your opponent is not just what option they're picking, is when they're picking it.
Believe in time and space.
Yeah. So like in this same like scenario where I'm expecting like jump, attack, whatever, right? And I've made my reaction binary to, if they jump, I do this. If they do anything else, I do this. In this situation, I have everything covered to some extent, but likely there's very rarely times where you can cover literally everything. So what it sounds like I have everything covered, I have everything covered in terms of them doing something immediately. If they do nothing at all, sometimes that's the correct answer. Sometimes my correct answer is a response to one of the options that they pick is to do nothing. Maybe like the jump, if they jumped, I'm not supposed to do anything about it. If they do anything else, I'm supposed to defend myself immediately. Because sometimes, like this very big concept of like you press a button, but because you press something and if they didn't get hit by it, you're committed to an animation and now they can hit you for free or something like that. So pressing something hugely important. There's so many times where all options are covered, but not all seconds are covered, not all frames are covered. And so they have to intentionally delay it just to make sure that they are getting around whatever I'm trying to do. Hugely important. I love that you brought that up. It's like kind of I guess in my head I thought of it as kind of a specific thing to the game high level, but I think that's another like very universal.
No, I think these are all sorts of, I mean, the other pattern I was just thinking about, I mean, is a different tension. We talk about so much kind of work and life, and I just wonder if you have a different kind of a challenge with, like work and play, because some people would, I'm sure all gamers, athletes feel this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Work has become play, but you also, I think the point of work-life balance kind of issues is how do you re-energize away, right? And how do you make sure that there's other elements, dimensions to your life? Because I think you'll be stronger in the game and in the work by having that other support around you. How do you manage that?
So currently I'm not doing a job outside of a game, but I was for most of my time playing so far. I had been at some point working while also playing. I think the best way I found for me to work is just if I'm able to kind of make it some kind of competition in my own head in that sense where, okay, how can I like optimize what I'm doing? When I make it a game of optimization.
No, you gamify.
Yeah.
But how about the non? I guess I was saying I assume gaming is your work right now.
Yes, it is.
I had to completely understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you surround it with, so that? Because I love the way your brain works, but if your brain is working that way 100% of the time, you will burn out and be exhausted. So how do you build some elements around it so that you do have opportunities to re-energize?
So I think the things that's kind of like weird to describe. I don't. It's like when people are like, "Well, I'm a professional gamer" or something like that. It's like you must play like video games like all day, every day, or something.
Yeah,
like that.
no, I would have totally assumed you do not.
It's really funny because like I was like, okay, what other games do you play? And it's like that's a good question. I don't think I really play a lot of other games. I kind of play generally what I do is I have the one game that I play, which is Super Smash Brothers, and I have a game that's not Super Smash Brothers that isn't multiplayer, something like that. It's like one thing that's going on in the background. So it's like if I'm ever like burnt out of that, I have another game. But in the grand scheme of like people who are described as gamers, I've played very few games as a result of this. I spent the last 6 years playing one game and then maybe one game in the background or something like that. But most of it really is just kind of like with friends. It's kind of weird. Playing the game is very exhausting.
It must be.
To like
Mentally and physically.
yeah.
Maybe even emotionally.
There was all of the above. I really actually frequently, one of the things, I'm a coach as well as like a player, and I'm working with a lot of people, a lot of people have this idea that they just need to slam themselves into it, like 8 hours a day or something like that. And I actually tell them, yes and no, like you will get better at some things. You will probably also get extremely frustrated because you're putting that much time into it.
That's a recipe for disaster.
The quality of the practice is probably going to go down with the quantity going up after a certain point. I think
the diminishing marginal returns.
yes, and not only will the quality go down, but then like the quality is going down, so you're not going to be getting the results you feel like you should be for the amount of time that you put in, and you're going to get extremely frustrated at losses. You're going to get really, really upset. And I think one of the most important things is when you're competing in anything, if something is going wrong outside of your life, you should probably not be competing in whatever you're doing, because if you care about it at least as much as I care about it and people who are putting in that much time into it care about it, then if something is going wrong outside of your life and then you have a bad day in the game or something like that, everything feels like it's falling apart. It's going to be really, really... And then, that's going to impact your next quality of practice, and you're going to start going to tournaments like thinking that, well, if I don't do good, then my happiness kind of banks on this, and that's the horrible pressure to play under. I've done it before, absolutely awful idea. As like you should sort out what's going on in your life, make sure you have like good relationships, good health. Yes, and it's really had like a huge impact on me. This is a big mistake that I.
What you preach.
Yeah. It's like I can tell you from experience, this will like ruin your mental health if you treat it like this. And in fact, it's kind of like a sad thing. It's like I know you will get better if you put this kind of time into the game and focus all of your energy into it, but it will crash at some point. At some point, it's going to hit you.
You have to sustain.
Yeah, and so most of what I do is I spend time hanging out with friends. That's like, I think having good relationships and knowing like people that I have support me like in the background, I think is probably one of the best tools that you have to maintain it. Because you know that, regardless of how it goes, especially if you're bringing those friends to the tournaments or something like that, you have a bad day in the tournament, you don't have to be like, really upset because you're all alone. You can just go over to your friends and be like, okay, we're gonna hang out and have fun. And then I won't think about what went wrong until like tomorrow when I'm more able to look at this objectively and not through the lens of someone who just lost and is very angry. Because that's how you feel if
I'm sure.
if you're taking it that seriously, right?
Right.
And it's like I never.
But I like the parallels between your individuality in the game and then the social. I mean, what we've typically found in the patterns we study is that you will find your yang to your yin in different ways, and that's going to be most supportive to kind of the whole, right? The whole you is how do you put these things together.
If you put that much of yourself into a game, there's no way you'll be able to separate your worth from the game if you're putting that much in it. It's just like kind of like the same people who work too much, right? What is happening at their work will begin to impact like their life outside.
But it sounds like that's what I like. The more I hear you talk about yourself, your identity isn't strictly as the champion gamer because you're also a coach. Like I'm hearing you say these words. There is a bigger whole that helps kind of hold together the gaming side of Stephen and the other sides, and I think that works.
And I think it does so much for me in the sense of
from resilience.
I hate being introduced to people who are not like I don't know, just like normal people in every day. Is like this guy's like a professional gamer or something like that. Partially one because it doesn't sound that cool, but
I think it does.
I don't know, depending on who you're talking to.
Fair.
But and it's like, but also because like I don't want to associate my identity all around like how I do in this game or something like that. I don't want people measuring, like feel like I'm being measured by how good I do in
Well,
this
it goes
game.
back to one bad day, then
exactly.
That's not really a condemnation on your life
I'm
by any
already
stretch.
measuring myself. I don't want to feel like I'm externally being measured by the performance in the game. I was like, I also coach. I do that as well, and then I also like have all these friends that I hang out with and do all sorts of silly things with, and like I have all these other things in my life. I'm a finance major, and like the more things I feel like I am.
See, I'm proud of that.
Exactly, yeah. And like the more things I feel like I'm good at, the easier it is to not stress unnecessarily about the one thing I particularly care about being great at.
Seriously, Stephen, I think that's going to be key to your longevity, but also your success in multiple dimensions. So, it's such a pleasure just to meet you and to get to talk through this. I'm learning on the gaming side, but I think that's part of it is we're always learning.
I'm always so excited to talk about stuff like this. I could talk about, I think it's probably my favorite subject. I like talking about it more than I like talking about the game. I like talking about how the game can be broadened and applied to every other area of life. This is like probably my favorite subject ever. So this
as we gamify so much in the world, from business to our lives, I think we all have a lot to learn from each other. So thank you.